I have something that I know the world needs to hear. This podcast is for people who want to get their voice out there. They don't want to do it in gimmicky ways. They want to do it in ways that feel authentic and that actually give them a platform to talk, to share their opinion. The world can be a better place as a result of listening to that message and taking action.
Hello and welcome to the Big Vision Business Owners podcast. This is the place for business owners that have a message that they want to share with the world. And we'll be talking on this podcast about how to get seen online, how to raise your visibility and actually get your message out there so that you can have that impact on the world. We are all about creating a true connection with your audience, building a community around your podcast, what you do, that feeds into your business, that can lead to growth, leads, and more sales. And finally, we're all about changing the world, changing the way the world thinks by helping you to share your message so you can have that impact, leave that lasting legacy, and be part of greater change in the future. And I'm your host, Chantel Dyson, who's here to do it with you along the way. I'll be sharing my expertise and experiences with being a big vision business owner, with being able to create content online the clever way, which means not having to spend hours on your phone. And together, we'll be looking at how we can raise your profile online to get your message seen and heard. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
Hello and welcome back to the next episode of Big Vision Business Owners. Now, for most of you, it will just feel like the next episode. Maybe you wait weekly to hear them. But for me, it's been a while since I've recorded them. For anyone that's seen any videos before, you will know that one of the methods that I promote, whatever piece of content you're creating, is that you batch create. It gives the appearance that it's coming out weekly or, content is coming out on your Instagram profile daily. But in terms of a podcast, realistically, you don't want to be in a constant weekly churn of recording an episode, editing it, uploading it, promoting it, and then going straight back into a writing cycle within 7 days. Realistically, you want time out to think about what topics you're going to cover, planning, doing a kind of outline, rough. Then you get into the recording where, like today, I'll be recording multiple episodes, and I'll do some next week as well, just because of timing. Then they are stocked up, ready to be edited. And obviously some are needed before others. And then you can go through the whole promotion part as it gets released. But you're in these kind of zones. And for anyone I know, in particular women are starting to pay more attention to their hormones and the time of the month. This might fit in with that quite well. It's not something that I've delved into, but I definitely have periods where I'm better at going into what I'm thinking about. And I'm sure someone that is into that would be like, oh, that's probably that time of the month, and so on. So for me, it's been a while since I've been recording. And the whole concept of Big Vision Business Owners as the new second podcast, so my original podcast, The Single Girl's Guide to Life, was when I was a life coach. I was helping single women to embrace that single life, to overcome loneliness. That was one of the biggest things because it was something that I had experienced and hadn't realised was such a thing. And it wasn't the act of being single per se. It was exacerbated, it was brought to attention because you are on your own, and in your mid-20s everyone around you is starting to settle down if they haven't already settled down, and there's less people around experiencing singlehood. When you were at uni, say, there was probably more of a skew of people being single, going out, not focusing on relationships, and there were always groups that were, and individuals that had been coupled up since they were at school. That's fine, but there was a bigger proportion. And obviously naturally as time goes on, I had been one of those people that had been in a relationship since the ages of 17. I'd been in 2, so until 26. So I'd been part of that cohort, and the stark reality and the difference between them being single at 27 for the first time was like, oh wow, like this, I didn't know this is what it was like, and what's dating. So that was the Single Girl's Guide to Life. It was what that did. Whereas this podcast is another podcast, something that I know lots about, can present, etc. And it's for business owners with a big vision who might not be that big yet, probably aren't that big yet. It's for that kind of, not underdog, I would say, but the person that's not there yet. And is trying to get there. Is trying to get there as that person in the industry that people know for those things. And I know in my close circle of business owners, that I'm becoming known as that podcast person. There's a little bit of content in there because content relates, like podcasting is just one form of content, and we're all trying to create content to get attention online in some way. I don't think anyone is completely offline. They've either got even a private podcast, they've got Instagram pages, TikTok pages, obviously, or you're someone that's focusing on PR, which even if it's not directly your content, either your story is your content or you're writing pieces for other people, which is the content. Some people love a blog. So I go into that podcast area because of many reasons that I think podcasting is the best thing to do. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about how I got to the conclusion of deciding that a podcast was the right thing for me when I was a life coach. And I'm going to disclaimer it that obviously I have a podcast for this one, and I think it's important that I do, as a podcast expert, have one. But it's really interesting because part of this episode has developed as a result of realising that this podcast, so far to date, has been very different to the style of podcast that I had when I was a life coach. And it's why, if you ask me in particular who I'm looking to work with, I say life coaches, therapists, because these are the people that I once was, as it were. I wasn't a therapist. You're not a therapist as a life coach, but I was a life coach, and I understood what it meant to be trying to help people with their lives. And there's a specific element that comes in there when you're a life coach, whilst you are, by definition of coaching, not meant to be teaching people. I'm a teacher by trade as well. So I had this balance of, I'll use some coaching skills at these times, and I'll use some mentoring skills at these times, and then sometimes flat out there's concepts to be taught, and it was a blended model of those things. But when it came to the podcast, it's very different because it was not just here's how to do stuff, which I felt a little bit more of a pull towards on this podcast, which has felt more educational. It's felt more like you want to know tactics for doing XYZ, and you want to know how you can do this. And that was very different to life coaching. The life coaching podcast, the Single Girl's Guide to Life, was in its basic, most simplest form. It was a challenge against the viewpoints that single life sucked, that single life was the worst position that you could be in life, and the experience that myself, but also my fellow community that eventually built as a result of sharing stories, experiences and thoughts, came to say that they were experiencing in single life, such as judgment about the fact that, oh, what's going to happen? Are you never going to have kids if you're choosing to be single? Or what's wrong with you if you're single? And it was very much, I mean, you could call it activism in some way, I suppose. And this is what I realised that was probably missing a little bit from this podcast, that whilst it's useful to give that information away, I tell people this all the time when I'm planning their podcast with them. We're doing like how-to content in there, but we need stories and we need that. But I hadn't necessarily put in that the Single Girl's Guide to Life had been so thought-provoking and validating for a whole group of people. And it's interesting because it's not season 2, but it feels like we're entering into season 2, chapter 2 of this podcast, where we're going to start thinking about what doesn't seem to work properly and what we can challenge in this industry. So I wanted to focus today not on the challenges, actually. I wanted to focus on the reason why. The reason why I started the Single Girl's Guide to Life. And you're hearing glimmers of it already. You're hearing already that it was my situation. My situation was that I was single for the first time as an adult. I was divorced at 26, and I felt that whilst that had been a very difficult time, although compared to my partner's divorce, not half as difficult as it felt, you know. I actually did always appreciate that. I knew whilst it was tense between me and my ex, and there were some sticking points, I knew it wasn't that bad. I knew we got off quite lightly, financially, having to deal with how to divide the assets, apart from like arguing over Hoover. That was about it. So I'd always known it wasn't too bad in that sense, but the experience of being single, I hadn't ever been aware of. I'm sure some single people had been aware of for a long time, but I felt that there was a place that I could offer there and bring all the things that I'd used the opportunity of being single to the forefront. And this idea of loneliness, which I felt incredibly so, and that wasn't a result of being single, because from the videos that I used to share online, clips of the podcast, I used to get people in relationships commenting and saying, like, I'm not single, but I feel that too. Like, I have my partner, I have my boyfriend, but if he weren't there, if they weren't there, then I don't know who I'd have, because I don't see my friends anymore. I don't see them and they don't see me. We default to our partners to do everything with us. I just want some girl friends that are the same as me. Now, I never went into the specialism of helping that group of people out. And that's not because I didn't want to help, but I knew that at the start I had to niche. And those people that are in relationships can often find other people that are in relationships. When you are single, it's really quite difficult to find other single people to be around and not have someone expect that you're trying to date them. Obviously, so it's opposite gender, there's just an assumption, because we've got such a heteronormative approach to everything, that, oh gosh, that could be a potential future date. Oh my god, do you fancy them? Anything like that. But to try and find other single girls, like, even some of the methods that I would suggest, like, simple, as you would expect, like, oh, if you're looking for new friends, go to a gym class. Go to that gym class. Well, one, practically speaking, it's really hard to talk to people at gym classes. And two, how many of them are actually single? And whilst their status isn't everything, when you are single, you want someone there that understands what it's like. And that was what I learned as I shared my stories and connected with my community, which I valued more than anything over time, to the point that Chantel the coach has been, basically, it's been left since I started this business, because I can't do both in the way that I was doing it before. I was releasing a weekly podcast episode there as well, churning out the content. I couldn't do it. However, since I've managed to get this one pretty much underhand, we're slightly behind on podcast episodes, but this is why we're doing a batch record now. It's ready. It's never going to be delayed. I feel not upset, but I just feel like there's a little bit of me that misses that quite a lot. And I did a little poll the other day. I went back on that account and I was like, I kind of miss being here talking about the things that I was talking about, because they matter to me. Just because I'm not single anymore doesn't mean that doesn't matter. I want to be there encouraging single women to show them what is possible during your single period, or that you're going to choose to stay single forever until the point that an opportunity arises that's actually a decent option. And only then do you contemplate, or only when the right person and a really actual compatible good match comes along, is it something that you consider to change. I felt like that was missing. So I floated the idea that I would come back, but not with a podcast. So it meant that much to me that I'm gonna offer that support back out again through content. And I've learnt further methods. I've always had repurposing methods, but there's even more AI tools out there now than there were a year ago. And I use Opus.pro to take my YouTube videos, chop them up, and make them into clips. And quite often I get, about 20 clips. And of those 20, I go through, I listen to them all. Some of them do need editing because it's taking exactly what I've said, and there's better sequences of what I say. But the majority are good enough to just run. I'd say at least 50% can be taken, add a title, sort out the caption, of course. Not the closed captions, I mean the caption of like Insta, or turn it into a blog post, whatever it might be, and then post it. That methodology has saved me so much time that I'm like, okay, well, all of my videos of the Single Girl's Guide to Life are on YouTube. So why don't I just repurpose that? If I had a day a month, I could take everything I ever said for 2 years, minus the first few episodes, 18 of them that never got a video, and I could repurpose them and get that message out there. Because whilst that's not part of a big business model, like it's not set up to run on its own as evergreen or have products, it's not far off. And at some point there could be a funnel, but that isn't my primary reason for that one today. Back in 2021, it was a blend. It was, I have something that I know the world needs to hear, that a group of people would benefit from seeing, from hearing about, and for there being a community around it. That was what drove me. And I had this picture on the wall over there. That is my wall of work. There's a whiteboard. But before the whiteboard, it was just big A3 or A2 pieces of paper. And there was a sad face with where somebody was at, which was lonely, not having people to do things with, feeling lost. Feeling lost is such a vague term, but that is ultimately what was written there, because they were. I think at that stage it was very relevant and it was the quarter life crisis, as I phrased it. That experience of not being where you should be compared to others, and feeling locked out of a situation, or locked in, depending, but many feeling locked out of the experience of being in a relationship. And there was a smiley version, which was confidence in themselves, knowing who they were, going on solo trips alone. And the transformation wasn't a relationship, and it wasn't friends either. It was connection. It was connection to themselves and knowing who they were and what they really wanted. And that kind of came from the quarter life crisis stuff. And it was then connection to other people. And it was connection to their life that had meaning and purpose. And so I'd worked through those. I'd come up with that kind of methodology, and that's what I brought to the table. And that was what I wanted to offer through the podcast. And yes, of course, it would elevate my status. It would start to get people to pay attention to me, listen to me. I didn't know it was gonna do as well as it did. And I mean, I hoped. We all hope, don't we? We all hope that whatever we do, especially if you're a change maker, if you're someone that wants the world to change as a result of what you do, then you are hoping that many people see it. That it is seen by a number of people so that the message gets out there and that the world can be a better place as a result of listening to that message and taking action, or of seeing what you did and feeling inspired to go out there and do something similar, or try and do exactly the same. So when it comes to this podcast, or to thinking about whether you want a podcast, I think one of the things that makes sure that I don't feel like it's a drag, and the reason that I'm getting a pull to go towards and add in an extra day, at least a month, of repurposing content, and why I showed up every single week for 2 years. There was a slight blip in June, but we made up for it in October at the end. But otherwise, every single week showed up, was because I really cared about what I was saying. It wasn't just to feed the business. It wasn't just to get known, and I never desired to be an influencer, but ultimately when you look, it's not an influencer by like Instagram definition. It's your old school influencer. It is, oh gosh, this is brave. It is the people that get platforms and they share a message. Why am I thinking of Martin Luther King? Like, there's change to be made. And his cause may have been stronger at the time. But personally, I think loneliness is a pandemic of itself. I think it's happening all over the world. There are some hubs that are very good at not doing it, at not falling into that trap so much, because their community connections are stronger. Listen to what is behind my voice when I talk about it. It's not me just delivering something for the sake of delivering it. You can tell if you get me started too much, and I'm trying to bring myself back every single time because this is not an episode about loneliness. The point is that episode, that podcast, every episode, was filled with passion and experience and understanding as best possible of what it was like to be single and to find it really bloody hard. And podcasting is a very, very long game. It takes understanding what you really want to share. Now, some people literally use it as a business model in their business. I'm not for that method. I'm really not. If you are sat there going, I just want to make money from a podcast, I can't wait to monetize it, then you'd have heard in the previous episode about ways to monetize your podcast that my preference, I was not promoting it, but my preference is not that you're going to get sponsorship, is that you're going to do merchandise, is that you're going to do a membership. And not because those don't work. People make those work all the time and they are options. But we're not going to just gimmick you out. We're not trying to get the numbers so high so that you can attract a sponsor. We're not trying to get 500 people in at £1 each so that you get £500 an episode. We're going to be trying to do something that genuinely gets attention. We are not going to run a competition on launch. I did it for Big Vision business owners because I'd heard this technique and I thought, well, if nothing else, I need to do it to know what it really does. And it can work. Like, the more episodes you have on release, the more people that download those episodes obviously rank you higher in the charts. And the higher in the charts, you can put a little accolade on and say you were a top 100 or a top 10 in this Apple Podcast chart. Were you really, though? Were you really, if you bribed people to click something? Did you really have a clear enough message? Something that you were passionate about talking about? Was your content really good enough to make people listen? Or were you just popular enough and had enough of a convincing prize to give away to people that made them listen to your podcast? I don't think that that's what I want to do. And it made me feel so icky that I didn't even promote it properly because it just made me feel meh. And I didn't like it. It's down to each person what they want to do, but I never started the podcast just to get in the top 10 charts. I never really thought about that. I didn't even know it was a thing. I just started a podcast because I wanted to share what I had to say, and it was part of the personal brand. It was part of Chantal the Coach, the love and life coach for singles, which was not what I called myself at the time, but it was along those lines. It was going to be about quarter life crisis and being single and going through that experience and loneliness. And with this podcast, as I said, this is season 2. So this podcast is for people who want to get their voice out there. They don't want to do it in gimmicky ways. They want to do it in ways that feel authentic and that actually give them a platform to talk, that actually allows them to share their opinion. And you got to be prepared if you're going to put your opinion out there. And I've had minor backlash, I would say. But you're going to get people that don't agree with you. Even down to if you niche too far, and not even niche too far, but if you're very specific with your examples, people can get quite, well, I'm single and I'm not lonely. I know that. I knew that. Like, I'm not saying that everyone that's single is lonely. But plenty of people are. And from a research perspective, we know that being single makes you more likely to be lonely. That's what I used to say back. And look at how much of an expert I sounded when I delivered that. Because I totally understood what they meant. I'm not generalising every single person. But I am trying to speak to a common problem that single people experience. And just because you're not in the common problem group doesn't mean that I shouldn't be here talking about that. Other people just felt really angry about me trying to empower these people. Or if I did a sort of them and us scenario, so obviously it's them that are the problem in dating. I mean, there was a lot of self-reflection for people, but some people, the little snippets that go out, which are intended to get attention, they got attention from the wrong person. There was only one video, and I posted, I think, 600 in a year. There was only one video that I was like, we're turning the comments off. Because once TikTok gets into an algorithm and it pushes it to a certain group of people, and those people are commenting and then they're sharing it and they were responding to it, and I was like, I don't want TikTok to learn that this is my audience, because it's not. It was not meant. I don't even know how it got in front of those people. I had the real estate. I was known for single people, particularly single women, and how it got to the group that it got to. I mean, it makes sense because they would watch the same stuff but respond to it. But I was like, oh God, I don't want TikTok to keep on pushing my stuff there. So I turned comments off. 1, to not have to keep dealing with every response coming through, but 2, so that TikTok didn't learn the wrong audience. And so putting your opinion out there is a brave thing to do, and it makes the difference in the online space. So many people putting out the same old content, regurgitating the same old stuff, and not saying what they really think in their industry or in their niche or in their area of expertise or the thing that they feel most passionate about. And it took me to reflect and start thinking about what I was doing with the Single Girl's Guide to Life to think, you know what, this needs a reboot. This needs a slightly fresher approach. This needs something less strategic. It's kind of strategic to do it, but it's less strategic in approach. And I can feel that this is a stronger piece of content, but we always have those things where we do a great piece of content and then it flops. The ultimate thing is that no matter what you do in your podcast with any content, you don't know till you've put it out there. My process for the Single Girl's Guide to Life was always like, let's keep iterating, let's keep paying attention, go with what's topical, go with what you are reading about and then you have thoughts about and then you want to bring to the table. Even if you read a book that's not about single life, in this case, I'm not ever reading books about podcasting. I'm obviously learning by doing. But what that book says about that, how can I apply it, if at all, to single life? Does it make sense? Does it contradict something? Is it a new perspective? Is it something to go, oh, hang on, that's what I did there? Or, do I agree? Do I disagree? get these thoughts, get these opinions, because I can tell you now your in-person conversations will develop with the right people as well. And then you're able to come up with much better topics of content, and you start to feel what's right. And some episodes I didn't get as many downloads, but I knew that they were valuable. I'm like, well, I wanted to get that out there. I felt it was necessary at the time. Other episodes, mostly that were on dating, did the best. And eventually I did go into dating, but there was one time where I was really resistant. I didn't want to talk about dating because I didn't want single people to feel that they had to be dating, because they shouldn't. It's very easy for people to say, oh, when's your next date? When are you looking for someone? And single people sometimes just need a break. Dating is tiring. Single people don't need to be worrying about their single status or trying to change that single status the minute that they became single. They actually need like a good bit of time to calm down, chill out, regroup, sort it out. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast, okay, you can interview people, and I know that that's such a popular method for some of you, and I think I'm going to mention it. Do I ever get through an episode and not mention this? I think a lot of you watch or hear Diary of a CEO, and you see the interview style podcast. And if you go back far enough, you'll find out why Stephen Bartlett shifted from doing essentially a solo podcast to that, and that was to increase his exposure. But he's still not the expert in any of those fields. He's kind of built himself in terms of personal development because of the content he put out, and obviously he has Happy Sexy Millionaire as well. So he did have his own book, but really he's a podcast host. Whereas I definitely think if you're trying to establish yourself as someone, as something that you want to get known as in podcasting and in your industry, is that you've got to have your own solo podcast, because you've got to have your own views and you've got to have your own opinions. And by all means, bring a guest on, one in every 4. Jay Shetty does it, I think, every week. The last I knew, it was interview and solo every week, from what I remember. It's totally fine to do. Leverage on one part, establish yourself as an expert on the other. I used to bring guests on because there were topics I couldn't talk about. I had Rosie Leach at the time. She was a single mum, and it was really useful for her to talk about that experience of the parenting. I can't do that to this day. I had Marie. She came on and spoke about menopause, which I've got no knowledge of, but there's an audience that potentially need to start thinking about that. My audience were 30s to 40s, a little bit of 20s in there, probably gone now as well, especially with me shifting up into the next bracket. It would be the late 20s. So that was great. There was just a great variety of different people, people that celebrated their approach to being single and how to get intimacy even without being in a relationship. That was Alex that came on from Digitastic. She was fabulous at sharing that. That was 2 episodes. So there are ways to make it so that you can still have that style. But if you're going to go down that route and establish yourself, then find the why inside of you to overcome the slog that is podcasting, because it's weekly in terms of release, it's monthly in terms of the process, and it's long. You won't see results. Most people won't see results until about 6 months in. That's quite common knowledge, that you have to give it a good amount of time. And I'm doing my kind of reflection 3 months in. Like, I had ideas, had some plans, did them, and then I've gone, okay, this is working, this doesn't feel right, and I've just sat and thought about it and reconsidered where I was and who I'm trying to reach and what I was thinking back when I was starting my podcast, which took me back to the very first little trailer, which, whilst I don't have videos of any of the first few episodes, I have a video of the trailer of The Single Girl's Guide to Life, which I didn't know I had. It's on YouTube, and I watched it back and I listened to what I introduced myself as, and it's got the music underneath, and it's super cute to look back at, and I say it quite well actually as things go. But I was thinking, what was I thinking? I'd love to try and find my journal from that time. I've probably got some videos actually, which I should go back to, but what was I thinking at that time, and what did I need, and what was I trying to do? And that's what's inspired season 2, this new era of, let's see how these episodes go. Let's see what juiciness the AI tool can pick out for each one. Let's see how much more passionate I sound when I'm talking about things. And I want to know what you think as well. So I'm going to put a little question on the old Spotify thing. There's a way that you can answer the Q&A. I don't know what question it's going to be yet, but I'm going to make sure there's an option for it. And I want you to go away. And if podcasting is on your list for 2024, I want you to really think about what your core message is going to be, who it's specifically going to be for, and what messages and stories and themes that you want to include, and what you can talk passionately about for 15-20 minutes every week on your own, and that you're brave enough, or going to build up the bravery to put out there into the world for anyone that wants to listen to hear. That is what I did with the Single Girl's Guide to Life. It is what I'm doing with season 2 and why I'm here, that we are building thought change people for the world, that we are finding people that want to change the way the world thinks, that want to have an impact with their business, and that need to get seen online. Not just want, need to get seen online, and obviously as a result of that, bring in leads to their business. I cannot change the world on my own. I was aiming to do it in one way, and there are ways for me to do that on a bigger scale by helping you to do the same as I was doing, but in your area and the area that you think needs change and development. So make sure you check out the links in the description for any of the guides, getting involved with the Big Vision Business Owners community, and connecting with me on Instagram. Make sure that you hit the notification button. The follow button on Spotify no longer gives you notifications that there's a new episode. You actually have to go in and click get notifications. So if you're listening on Spotify, make sure you do that, or hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts to keep up to date. Until next time, keep changing the way the world thinks, one podcast at a time.